Just arrived in the post is a large package containing some SL parts from a very nice man down in Epping who has 2 or 3 SLs that he's breaking. So if you need any parts, drop me a comment and I'll put you in touch. What he sent us is a cluster. Now, we did have a cluster which I rebuilt, and the day I rebuilt it, my darling wife knocked it off the table and broke the circuit board, plus it had a problem with the wiring anyway, so that didn't work. So hopefully we'll be able to pop that straight in the car and it will work, but you never know until you actually try these things. The other thing that he sent us was a light here with the glass missing. Now, the SL that we're doing came with 2 lights, but as you can see from this one, they're in terrible condition. In fact, we tried to get this re-chromed and the chromers just sent it back to us, laughing. Plus, you'll notice that this is so rusted, there's actually bits broken off it. So what I'm going to try and do in this video is, with 3 lights, end up with 2 good ones. So with this light here, what I actually need from it is the indicator lens and the bowl. Now, we already have a right-hand drive bowl here, which we've had re-chromed, but what I'm going to show you what to do is how to actually turn a right-hand bowl into a left-hand bowl by taking these fittings off and reversing them. That's what I'm going to hope to do in this video, and as I say, end up with 2 working lights. Now, I have previously done a very detailed video on how to refurbish these lights for the vacuum adjusted ones. These are the older style non-vacuum adjusted ones. In this particular case, I've actually got some rebuild kits from MB Classics because the parts on this car are just too rusted and worn out to be of any use. So I'm going to have to make up one of these parts here because the end bit is rusted off, clean up all of this, reverse the bowl, put everything back together with new seals, and that hopefully should be job done. So let's start with the light that's just arrived in the post. Now, as I say, this came without a glass, which is no problem because we've got all the glass, and you can expect to pay anywhere between £250 to £450 for a second-hand Euro spec light. When you buy them, you're likely to have to replace these seals here, and at the end I'll show you where we got our seals from and how much they cost. But be warned, these seals can be very, very expensive. So on top of what you may pay for a second-hand light, you're probably going to have an extra €100 or so, £100, just for the refurbishment parts. Once again, these parts here may or may not be serviceable. You may be able to get these screws out, or you may have to cut them out, in which case you're going to have to get a new set. So first of all, let's try getting these screws out, and let's see if we can get these nuts off without cracking the indicator lens, which we need. The other thing that often happens here is that's supposed to be crimped in. It's not supposed to be out like that. There's tiny little divots in the metal that hold that in, but that's a common problem if your indicator doesn't work, that pops out. So we'll have to fix that. And depending on the state of this, once we've disassembled it, we'll either decide to use this or we'll use the lens that came off the car, which we've obviously thoroughly cleaned. Now, if you're extremely lucky, these fittings will come off without shattering the plastic underneath. We'll be replacing the washers and the nuts, but use some penetrating fluid and let it sit there for a few days. If that nut is tight and you force it, what you'll end up doing is cracking all the plastic inside, and then it will just turn and it'll be a nightmare. So if that nut is tight and it's not coming off, my advice would be to cut it off with an angle grinder and very carefully so as not to damage the threads, or we use a little Dremel tool with a cut-off wheel. But that nut is coming off. Let's try the others. We've got all of those 3 nuts loose, but rather than trying to whiz them off past these dodgy threads here, what you do is you put a little bit of penetrating fluid on, you loosen it a quarter of a turn, tighten it down, loosen it a quarter of a turn, and you take these nuts off slowly. Now, it might take you half an hour to get these 3 nuts off, but the challenge is to get them off without the metal fittings turning in this indicator lens. Yay, we're going to make this 3 out of 3, because after about 20 minutes, I think we're just about there. There we go. Okay, once you have got those nuts off, this should just come off. Sometimes you need to tap these threads on the end just to knock them clear, but this should come off. There we go, one indicator lens unbroken. We'll be replacing this seal here, and let's have a little look and see what the reflectors are like on here. They normally rust out at the bottom here. This one is not too bad at all, just a little bit of rust. So we may clean up this light here and use this one because it's possibly in slightly better condition than this one, but there's not much in it, to be honest. Just before you cut or take these screws out, it's a good idea to make a note of how far up the threads they are. So when you put the whole thing back together, you can get it roughly where it was so that the beam isn't way out. Sometimes you can actually save these springs and cup washers, etc. These here, that little brass fitting there, it's not available separately. We managed to save all those fittings, although we will be replacing them. But it's worth noting that these two end bits here are actually different lengths. The longer one goes on the back here, like so, and the shorter one on the front attached to the armature here. So having carefully disassembled the light that came in today, I think what we're going to do is we are going to use this light here, the whole fitting, and just use the glass and the electrics from our car, because what came off this car is actually broken and it didn't come with any glass, but this will clean up and will be absolutely fine. The one that we've already spent hours cleaning is just ever so slightly worse condition in terms of corrosion, and obviously you can see this piece here. This armature here is actually quite rusted as well. So there's corrosion here around the screws, which doesn't exist on this piece here to the same extent. So we're going to spend the time to clean this one up and use this on our project car, and we'll sell that one. So that means this one here that we've had re-chromed, we are going to have to turn into a left-hand light. So the balls are basically interchangeable if you take off these end fittings here, and they're held on by rivets. So we're very carefully going to drill out these bits here and then move them over to here, and either use small nuts and bolts to put them on, or maybe some JB weld or a mixture of both to turn this into a left-hand one. So once again, we've got to take that off and put it there, this off and put it there. Just using a new 5mm drill bit, we've just drilled the heads of those rivets out, and this piece pops out here. We'll just push those rivets out and either re-rivet this if I can find a rivet gun. Now this rubber bung is on the wrong side and needs to be moved over to here, and in the middle of those rubber bungs is this little pin which you have to pull out before you can get the rubber out. That little pin basically spreads the rubber and stops it falling out. So you take that out first. Be able to take that bit out with a set of pliers. This piece was actually really heavily pitted and the wire wheel wasn't cutting it, so we just used a finger file there to get that rust off, and now we're just going to go over that with a coat of the MRO chrome galvanise, and that'll be ready to put back together tomorrow. This is the light fitting that arrived today and the one that we're going to be using, so we just need to set about cleaning this up. This car's obviously been repainted by the looks of things, and this is the overspray here, but we have to get all of that off, all of that pesky glue that someone's used to glue the seal on. We'll just be using a wire wheel and then some Dremel, a Dremel tool with some wire wheels to get into all these little spaces here. We've finished cleaning this up with a Dremel tool and a wire wheel, and now we're going to lay the seal in here and put the glass in. Now you can just twist these clips out the way when it comes to putting the glass in. It's much easier that way, and originally these clips will have had a little plastic thing like that on there, but often they are missing, or on some lights they didn't exist at all, so that one's missing, but that's not too much of a worry. Let's put that seal in and see how we get on. When you come to cut your seal, as you're buying it on a roll, this distance around here is just under 1 meter long, 100 centimeters. Doesn't seem it when you look at it. So you're going to cut about 1 meter of foam off. I'm going to put this seal on, and the original seals have the gap at the bottom here rather than at the top, and presumably that's so that any moisture can roll out. I'm not sure why, but anyway, we're going to do that the same way. It can help when you're doing this if you kind of just ever so slightly stretch the seal when you're doing it, and it'll make the seal slightly thinner, and then it'll spring into place. And this last bit, you want to cut it ever so slightly long so it kind of pushes together. Once you put the glass on top, like so, you will find that that compresses the seal down. Just make sure that when you do put that glass on, that it's nice and even. Now, when you come to put these clips in, put them on the metal first, and then clip them over the glass. There should be 3 of them. There's one missing on here, but we bought one from Mercedes. When you buy these clips from Mercedes, they come like this. Basically gold colour. If yours are rusty, just strip the rust off and put some rust encapsulator on like that, and that'll be absolutely fine. Next up, we're going to put on a brand new seal and the reflector, which we managed to take off here without breaking it. Now, these seals are quite expensive. Once again, as always, at the end of the video, I'll show you where I got all the seals and bits from. This particular one came from MB Classics here, but you can also get these from Mercedes, I believe, and also from the SL shop. Once you're confident you've got the seal on, remembering that you do not need any sealant on these seals. It would just make life really difficult for the next person if you start putting sealant on. Once you've got the seal on, this reflector just clips on and tucks underneath. When you come to tighten these nuts up here, remember to tighten them in a crisscross pattern, and whatever you do, do not over tighten them, otherwise you will crack the plastic of the lens. Next up, you're going to put this indicator light in and tighten that up. And remember, there should be a little piece of tape just there that goes between that little piece of metal, stop those wires rubbing out, and then you're going to put the new seal on. Just remember, these wires go underneath the seal like that, and you do not need any sealant or anything like that when you put this seal in. Just make sure that the surface is nice and clean when you put the seal in. These kits from MB Classics come with 3 of these little rubber bungs, and where you put them is slightly dependent on which bungs are still in place when you take your light to pieces. We are going to put one in this corner here because we've got one missing. And we're going to put one here, and then we're going to put one on that piece there. Getting these rubber bungs to fit in those holes is really difficult. And the way I do it is squeeze my thumb down with one hand, and then with the other hand use a set of needle nose pliers. They're sufficiently blunt at the end not to damage the rubber, just to push and tuck that in. When you're putting the actual bowl in, put this bit in first, and then push that bit down with a screwdriver to make sure it's down there. And once again, put a little bit of lube on there to help it on its way. Next up, we're going to put these new fittings in. Plastic washer on first, and then a rubber washer, and then that fits through the hole here. Before you screw that brass fitting all the way to the end, you want to get this little fitting through that hole, and once again, a little bit of lube will help. You've got that little fitting in, you can hook the seal over there and now screw the end of this brass fitting down so it's tight, but tight enough to compress that spring, but not so that the spring is all the way compressed. If you want to test whether the lights work or not, you can just hold a 9-volt battery across some of these terminals. You can work out just following the wires which is which. All the bulbs work, all the lights work on here. This is ready to go back in the car. We're going to try and make up one of these pieces here. This should be longer and have a right angled piece on it, but it's completely corroded away, and we're just going to use a sheet of steel from Euro Car Parts. Now this is quite thick steel, but it's about the same thickness as this here. So what we're going to try and do is we're going to make a template just using a very sharp pencil all the way around to here. What we've done is cut out a cardboard template to the best of our ability. What I'm going to do is draw around that template and then use an angle grinder to cut. Now when we draw around the template, we do not want the template to move, so I'm going to use a very strong neodymium magnet. That's hot. Cut the piece of metal out with an angle grinder and just gone over the edges with a flap wheel, and using a spring-loaded hole punch there. We just put a tiny hole in to actually, rather than drilling that hole, I'm going to see if I can use a hole punch here. 6.35. It's quite thick steel, but let's see if we're strong enough to do it. There we go. That's a perfect hole. These hole punch kits are excellent. I bought this originally for when we were spot welding one of the other Mercedes, but if you haven't got the correct drill bits, you can use one of these instead. This is not quite the perfect profile, this bit that we've cut, so I'm just going to use an old door stop here, which is exactly the right circumference. You could also just clamp a coin in there, and then I'm going to go over that with a flap wheel like so, with that clamped in place, and that should allow me to get that exactly right. That profile now is perfect. So we've cut that one out with the hole punch, but that hole is not quite big enough. Managed to cut my hand twice using that hole punch.
You're not good,
really
Papa.
Thick metal to punch holes through. I've got one on the other finger as well. And pull it right down. It's not painful. Just don't want to bleed all over my tools. Thanks. It's one of the advantages of using the hole punches. It makes an awful lot less mess. Just punches out these holes. I've just drilled these little pilot holes because the hole punch actually has a small spike on this bit here. You can just see that, and that just helps to center the hole punch. So I'm quite pleased with how that has come out. It's not 100% perfect, but bearing in mind you're never going to see this piece here. Everything lines up that side. Obviously this side here is the bit that's missing. The next thing, or the last thing we need to do, is make two bends in here. One bend here, and there's a right angled bend at the end here, but we're going to need to go down to the garage for that because we need very sharp metal edges to get crisp bends, and what we use is the I-beams. We're just down at the garage with this angle, or this I-beam here. It's got a very crisp edge here, and we're just going to bash that down and give us the right angle that we need for this piece here. Moment of truth. Got to make one more bend in this piece of metal, and unfortunately, because we bent that side first, we can't clamp it on one of the flat edges, so I'm just going to use a couple of these really super strong neodymium magnets to clamp it, so we've got this really crisp edge here just to make that bend there. Pleased with that. It's pretty much spot on that angle. Just attach that together with the old piece. The holes line up there in the middle. The angle looks about right. That's ready to go back on the car. That looks pretty much perfect in there. We're just going to hold that in with I think it's an M5 or M6 screw, Phillips screw like that, with a lock nut on the other side. We'll put a dab of super glue or thread lock on there so that the thing can't come undone. Next up, we're going to have to try and replicate the fittings on here. Now, the bowls themselves are basically the same, but they have a fitting here riveted on this corner, which we've already pre-painted. We just need to figure out a way to attach that on. And there's another fitting at the back here, which once again, we've taken off and painted. We just need to figure out how to fit that on there. Now, the original fittings were riveted on, you can see there, with these little rivets. And there's basically not a lot of clearance when you put this into the casing like that. You can see there's very little clearance here. So however we do it, there can't be much clearance sticking out there or here. And we've got to figure out a way to attach this to this. And the way I'm going to do it is using an M5 0.8 tapping some threads through there, and then using these coaching bolts here. Now these are M5 25mm, including square nut coaching bolts. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut down the length with an angle grinder, and then we're just going to put these two square bolts on there. That'll give us exactly the right length. Screw this into a piece of wood and then use an angle grinder to cut it. And then when we take those nuts off, that should clean the thread for us. Going to screw that into there, keep it stable, and then use an angle grinder to cut that off. So those screw heads would protrude too much for that to fit in here, like so. So what we've done is we've just kind of turned those into grub screws and just use the angle grinder to cut a little slot there. We may just shorten them, and what we'll do is we'll JB weld that piece on as well as screwing it. I'm going to mix up a little bit of JB weld to make sure that that piece stays where it is for the next 50 years. So it transpires after test fitting here, there's not enough clearance there to be using those round-headed screws. So once again, I've just made up my own little grub screws, and then that will clear that nicely. The next issue we've got is that these three nuts here that hold on the indicator are seized and rusted solid, and if you try and force those off with a socket, what will happen is you'll just crack the plastic inside and we'll be up for a new indicator lens, which I'm going to try and avoid. So what I'm going to try and do is very, very carefully use a cut-off wheel on a Dremel tool just to cut those nuts off without damaging that seal, because I think that seal's still going to be okay as well. Cut off the first slice of that nut, and sometimes if you're very lucky you'll find that the heat generated by actually cutting allows you to loosen that, and that's slightly loose now. So what we're going to do is just blast that and keep going back and forwards until that comes off. That was a success. We've got 3 of 3 nuts off without damaging the threads or the indicator lens. We can give that a thorough clean. I can tell that that's been off before because somebody has left one of the washers on that side. There shouldn't be any washers on that side there. So we'll give that a good clean. Before we put this back together, we'll do the same as usual. Clean these threads up with an M508 dye. Just get all that rust off, oil them, put new nuts and washers on there. So these seals have lost their elasticity. You just need to get a new seal. It's a false economy trying to reuse it, but this one here is just dirty. And what I'm going to use to clean it is a little, just a bristle brush on the end of a drill, and that tends to get all of that stuff off. Finishing touch, we're going to put some Black in a Flash turtle wax on this seal, and that will make it as good as new. We just have to get all of this old glue off, all of this corrosion off here. We're going to be using a mixture of bristle wheels, scrapers, Dremel tools to get into all of these gaps. It takes ages to clean all the glue off the inside of there. We're using a Dremel tool just with a straight bristle brush that allows us to get in there, but boy, you will never put glue on one of these seals again if you knew you had to get it off again every time you wanted to change a seal. Clean this up as best we can, and now we are just going to put on the front seal here, put the glass back on, and then put the whole thing back together. These black reflectors here, which we've refurbished, are actually different thicknesses on each side to make sure that you put them in the right way. So if you have reversed the bowl, you're going to have to either make one of these holes bigger, or better still, make one of these thinner. Trying to make one of these holes bigger if you've just re-chromed the bowl, or even if you haven't, is fraught with danger. So we're just going to use a little cut-off wheel and a Dremel tool and just make that ever so much smaller so that it fits in that gap. That job took absolutely ages to clean those lights down, get them re-chromed, replace all the nuts and bolts. We went basically from rusty bowls like this, only one of which was serviceable. We had to swap over the 2 bowls, fabricate our own pieces, but we've saved ourselves hundreds of pounds. As I say, to buy a set of headlights like that, especially genuine ones, you're not going to get much change for £1,500. And even if you go for the repo ones, the reproduction ones, they're still about £1,000. So I'm really pleased how that's come out. All we have to do now is go down to the garage and figure out whether these headlights actually work. That was a huge long process refurbishing those lights, but we've got everything working as it should. I'm just going to finish this video here and just leave links to where we got all the various seals and parts from and how much they cost. We got our indicator seal and also the fixing kit here from these guys here, MB Classics in Germany. They're excellent and they've got most things you'll ever need for your car. They've also got the seal here for the headlamp glass, and I didn't realize this, but you can buy those little pieces separately if you need to. As I say, each light, if you bought all the seals in one of these fixing kits, it's going to cost you about €100 to refurbish on top of the cost of the light. Here's the reason why you need to be careful when you're taking those indicators off, not to crack them. They're almost €100 each if you get them from MB Classics. If you type Mercedes R107 braking into eBay, you will get to this guy here, and as I mentioned, he is braking several SLs, and we have got many parts from him: headlights, dash, obscure bits of trim, and all sorts of other stuff. So it's definitely worth dropping him a message if there's something you need. Last and probably least, we got a set of 45 little steel wheels for cleaning up those lights from these guys here. Cost us £12.49 from Amazon delivered.